You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Well, hello and welcome everyone to Literary Treks, and of course you know I'm just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and I'm super excited this week because we've got a very special episode. And before we dive into that though and start talking to our author, we've got a brand new author here in Star Trek Books. I'm super excited to welcome them to the show. But course, reminder, you can get us wherever you get your podcasts. So make sure you subscribe, just reviewing us or rating us wherever that is, whether it's on like Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything like that. Of course, you can find us on Twitter at TrekFM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can join the listeners only discussion group if you'd like, and called the Babel Conference over there on Facebook. And of course, you can find us at Trek.fm, where you can find every single show that we're doing here on the network. But without further ado, let's jump into our feature. Well, Alex, welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have you here. And gosh, first I got to ask, it's always fun to talk to somebody who has never written a Star Trek book before, and this is kind of your first time into that four-way. So what was it like getting to dive into this universe?
So it was like hugely intimidating for one. I mean, there's a lot to know. And I think there's a lot of expectation around it. People want to know if you get Trek, but that means something different depending on which person you're talking to. And it means something radically different depending on which person you're talking to. So it was, you could say it was pretty intimidating. But then at the same time, once I started writing, I don't know, it was great. Like working with the characters felt like just coming home, it's really easy for me. I really love those characters, so it didn't make it hard. That's always I think the easiest way to be able to dive into something is when you really love it. And so, since this is your first time here, I was wondering what your Star Trek story is. Like, how did you find Star Trek? What made you kind of fall in love with it? Sure. Well, it's kind of embarrassing. My sister and I caught like some TNT marathon or whoever was broadcasting it, but it was probably actually USA back then. But it was the original series, and we were pretty young, and we were just watching them, and we thought we were going to make fun of them. And the longer we watched, the more we got into it. The less we could make fun of it, the more we were just like, "This is great." And so that was around the same time that there was a big Star Trek celebration, and Deep Space Nine came out at the same time. And it was a huge deal in my hometown because the 25th anniversary came there, and so that was all that I really needed to happen at the same time to make sure that I was sort of cemented as a fan. I really love it, and it's been there ever since. That is really cool. It's funny you say that. People will know if they've listened to the show, but my very first Star Trek episode to ever watch was Plato's Children. So I'm not sure if you can get a weirder episode to have your introduction as. Oh, there's the Spock riding Kirk as a horse. This is true. Right? This is true. The other way around. I can't remember which one was riding which. So But growing up in the time period of the Next Generation, and then of course, Deep Space Nine starting, and Deep Space Nine really became my love because it's like the show I started from the beginning. And so it sounds like for you, Deep Space Nine kind of has a special place in your heart then. Very much so, very much so. And it was a bit of an answer to the much more dry Next Generation.
I can agree with that.
Or it felt drier when I was young. Now that I'm older, Next Generation is like a totally different show.
It is, right? Because I think that there is something about that show that makes it feel a little bit more adult, a little less accessible to necessarily children. But as an adult, you kind of get a lot of what they're going for.
Well, it's because the only child characters, like, they're rated off the show.
This is true. When they're told to shut up all the time, you know.
Yeah. As a kid, I'm just like, I don't know about this. You know, Jake seems happy. Wesley seems like he got dragged with his mom's date.
Well, what ended up like being the thing then, since you obviously wrote a Deep Space Nine story here, what ended up being the thing that really helped you kind of fall in love with Deep Space Nine and its characters?
Oh, I mean, that's really hard to say. I really appreciated when they started bringing in, like, the season 4 area where I wrote the book. It's like got to be some of my favorite sections, you know. Where they bring in Worf right after the movie, you know, they destroyed the Enterprise, and so he's sort of got to find his new home. And at the same time, you know, it feels like the cast is sort of reconstituting before the Dominion War really gets hot. And so all these new friend groups are forming, and all these, you know, like, Jadzia is no longer possibly an item with Julian, but she's about to be an item with Worf, you know. And so there's this great area to work in where there's a whole lot of freedom and a whole lot of new relationships, or it feels new.
Yeah,
I should say.
I think that's something that I think for myself really responded to with Deep Space Nine, is that, and I think that's a really key word, is relationship. Like, it is all about relationships, more so than obviously the Next Generation. I think they're there, but Deep Space Nine is legitimately all about these people rubbing up against each other, and because they're all so different, you know, and they all come from different backgrounds, and, you know, they're not all Starfleet. You have a lot of people that, in all honesty, couldn't care less about Starfleet or their ideals.
Right, like they're
so.
Right, the Bajoran benefit of the Federation is dubious at this point, you know, and they live and work in a work camp, an ex-work camp. That's not weird. Next to a wormhole with magic gods that live in it, you know. Deep Space Nine is more overtly magical than the other series, though. You know, Next Generation's like, let's kick it off with Picard versus God.
Yeah,
you know?
and that's great. That's a great point. And in here, it's more of like there, and it's something that we talk about on the Orb all the time. And you know, I think Deep Space Nine has a much better relationship between the religious aspect and or spiritual aspect of life and life in general, and science, and it has a better relationship about talking about all of those things, which for me was also very important as well. And so by them treating it with such respect and an honor, I think is something that makes the show really special, and even really still even unique in the Star Trek canon. So,
you know, to your point, I think that you can look at the way that the other cultures are interrogated. And they're usually sort of interrogated from inside in Deep Space Nine. So it'll be like a Bajoran temple as witnessed by Akira, you know, whereas like in Next Generation, it's sort of like, let's go do a Chadich off the ship. This is a weird thing we're doing. You know, we're gonna immerse ourselves in Klingon culture. Normally we're on the ship. And Deep Space Nine is a lot messier in that regard. It's a lot more, it makes everybody just kind of feel like they live there, as opposed to a science mission where we're visiting a bunch of people.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's a lived-in universe in many ways. Yeah, I love that. So, well, for you then, coming to Revenant, what was the genesis for this book as you were, you know, I'm sure, and how did the book come about for you?
I was actually a little worried because there's so much Star Trek to know. Deep Space Nine really is the era that I sort of latched onto first, so it was the one that I was the most thorough with, and and Jadzia of all the characters was sort of my favorite in that series, and so for when they said like we want you to write a Trek book, I was like, I don't know about this. It's really scary. It's like I said, there's a lot to know. And they said, well, we want you to do a Deep Space Nine Jadzia Dax book. And it was just like, how? Okay, cool. Yeah, amazing. They said I could do any Dax I wanted, and I picked that one, of course. But I think that I think they really wanted to have a trans or non-binary voice writing a Trill book. I think that was something that was important to them. And I appreciate that. But more, I think they also had, I don't know, like, I feel like in order to really understand the Trill, it does kind of help to be able to think about gender in perhaps a different way than somebody who only has one set of experiences.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the Trill in general, and the fact that they have the ability to experience different lifetimes and literally what it's like to be a different sex,
another person,
and a different person, and like both of those things at the same, like that's an incredible experience. And one of the things I think that made the Trill so interesting, in the first place, as a species.
If I may, one of the things that was really nice was to get to go in there and to take the Trill in a direction that I feel like the show like almost did a couple of times, but and maybe maybe I would say they're doing a better job now, but when Jadzia's lines are things like, oh, it always takes me twice as long to get ready when I'm a woman, it's like, oh, that's so surface level. Oh my God. Mm-hmm. We could do way better than this. It's the same as like Duran, he kills people because he's crazy. Like, that's not why. Nobody kills anybody for that reason.
Yeah.
And so it was cool because as I was researching for the book as an adult, I got to see some of these things where I was like, I feel like these are maybe shortfalls even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think it's always interesting too, because like, everything is always a product of its time. But I think one of the cool things about a Star Trek is that it allows you to continue on, and it allows you to be able to bring new experiences to it. Bring new levels to it, which is the hallmark of something that lasts, right?
Right. Oh, I agree. And I think that Trek is really, as opposed to being adversarial to that, I think that Trek is really ripe for it. I think that it's a series that has always wanted to do the best for its time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so even when we go back and we're like, okay, like the black half white half face episode is really kind of simplistic from those old scientists era. The thing is, they were trying very hard for their time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm really glad you said that, because I think, a lot of times fans, when they look back, they can appreciate that Trek has always found a way to talk about the best of us within the context of where it is in time and space.
Right. And it's transgressively progressive.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can't expect them to have done things the way we might think about things now, because that wasn't even possible. It wasn't even a thought in anybody's brain then.
Well, and I'd rather have a smartphone than a tricorder. So, things change.
There you go. There you go.
I'd much rather have a smartphone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in many ways too, I think what that shows as well is that, I think it's C.S. Lewis who talks about the idea of having chronological snobbery, which is the idea that, your part of existence is the most advanced and the best. Like, and there's nothing you can learn from the past.
Sort of a
and I think
temporal
that's
ethnocentrism.
Yeah. And what's beautiful about this book, I think, and one of the things that I think that you were able to kind of really dive into with the Trill and I really love this idea, is about this idea of being able to redeem the past through the different lifetimes that they have as Trill, and that redemption is possible. And part of that is that they have a better understanding of the past because they live it. But but it's then so important to understand their history. And so I thought that was a really cool theme that you were able to dive into with this book and with the Trill, and it speaks directly to that kind of like tension that a lot of fans kind of have with older material. But it's like,
oh yeah,
you have to respect what happened before so that we don't end up repeating it. That's the famous statement, right?
Right. Well, and it's funny because Curzon's antics in the 90s are sort of like, yeah, Dax, you used to have a playboy in you, like you used to not be so straight-laced. And nowadays it's like you used to be something of a problem, actually. and Curzon and Duran are quite the inheritances to get. And that's something that I was thinking, I was really struck by as I was rewatching and researching for the book, was just how put upon Jadzia is and how much sort of grace under fire that she brings. And how much I think is the actor really behind that sort of, because she has such gravitas, right? Like she could just command every single scene she's in. And so it's neat to see the way that she copes with those characters on screen and those legacies on screen. And then I felt like it gave me a ton to work with.
And I think that's like, I like what you said, the grace to which she deals with them, because I think it's something to which when we kind of look at ourselves as if we don't need grace, we treat others badly. And Jadzia, because of her experience as a Trill and knowing these people very intimately, the good and the bad, she and the good and the bad in and of herself as well. Like she's able to extend more grace than we might do because we don't have that experience of really, and unless we spend the time to truly, spend years getting to know somebody on that type of intimate level. And it's kind of our snap judgments to which make that impossible.
Oh, yeah. And on top of it, she's wise but young. And so she has all the energy to deal with the world and all of the wisdom to kind of not get flapped.
Yeah.
And that's what I really like about her, is she's so fun to write. She just never, she screws up and she has problems, but they're all very accidental, awesome, she's not the kind of person that makes stupid mistakes. But at the same time, you can't make her perfect as a writer because then it's boring. And so trying to work with that was interesting.
It's one of the fun things about Dax is that she kind of revels in her imperfection, right? She enjoys the process of learning, and she is willing to have fun in life. It's kind of one of the things, especially we just on the Orb were talking about the way of the warrior, and in that episode specifically, she's trying to get Kira to loosen up and enjoy life, right?
Right.
And that's the beauty of, I think, one of the things that the Trill are able to have learned, which is that life is meant to be lived and to be lived to the fullest, and that those mistakes are going to come, and the important thing is about learning from those mistakes and moving forward, and not getting kind of mired necessarily in the past. And there's something really beautiful, I think, about that, because it's something we all need to learn.
Right. Well, and I also appreciate that she's a character who's, she's a woman, but she's also written as very possessed of her sexuality, which again, they didn't always do such a great job. But they but I think it's interesting because she often drags the other characters out of their comfort zone. She'll sort of answer the door and you'll see some lover walking through the background, or, she'll take Kira to the holodeck and Kira's like way too religiously conservative to handle it. um, and I think that I love that relationship, by the way, between Dax and Kira, and how Dax is very much an investigator and I have to tear apart every single mystery because I need to know how it works. And Kira's like, I need to preserve every single mystery because it's sacred. And, so that was a really fun symmetry to write.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about that because obviously they're both on the cover and that is a super important relationship, especially I think, as we move from the first few seasons, they establish a relationship, but by season 4, it really did feel like they were intentionally really building into that at that point. And so talk about just getting to spend time with those characters and kind of writing two sides of two completely different coins.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what makes them work is that they have this really great buddy cop dynamic, where we're, like I said, Dax really is. I have to check out every single thing. And Kira's brave enough to check out every single thing, but she's not necessarily going to want to, if Dax is like, I want to know how the wormhole works. And Kira's like, I'm pretty sure we're not supposed to know that. And so to see them working together on the show is really fun, but usually they're sort of facing a problem where the solution is set. We need to get out of Gul Dukat's trap, kind of. Whereas in this, where it's much more open-ended and they can sort of discuss things, there were a lot of little sit-downs that kind of came naturally for these characters over dinners where they were planning and plotting and strategizing. And that was my answer to trying to make it more Trek-like as well, as opposed to like trying to always skip to the action and always trying to skip to the explosions and that kind of stuff. I wanted them to turn over the problems together and evaluate them together. And because they have such unique voices, it actually makes it really easy. It's like the opposite of difficult. So.
Well, and one of the things I love about their relationship, and I think that you nail, and one of the things that it helps then by, when you bring in Worf and Bashir into the story as well, is that the beauty of Jadzia is that she really appreciates different perspectives because she understands as a Trill that different perspectives lead to better results, better ideas, right? Because you're really able to sift things through all of these different thought processes that lead to maybe the most truest of the answers. And so I thought that really helped with the book as well.
Thanks. No, I appreciate that. And I think that you're right that because of her extremely diverse array of experiences, she's always going to come with some level of empathy. And that's just such a great hallmark for that character. Especially later, she sort of cracks Worf's shell. And it was nice to put those hairline fractures in, by the way. I definitely wanted to write before their relationship was even close to sorted, because a lot of their best moments come on screen. And I can't bring myself to compete with that, like to even try, because it feels like that's sort of the relationship and that needs to be left alone. But I do love putting those early signs of it in there. In the same way that I liked putting a lot of references to like Bashir being a superhuman and stuff like that. Yeah,
that was great. And I think it worked really well in the story. But with Jadzia Worf, I think I did like the way in which, because it always made sense that they were going to work well as characters. I mean, I'm sure they had no idea that Michael Dorn and Terry Farrell were going to just have electric chemistry from the moment
burn up the screen, man.
Seriously, they're on fire, like a Klingon fire every time they're on screen together. But even from the first moment where he's like, "Nice hat," but I think what is great about pairing her with a Klingon is that Jadzia always embraced so much of Curzon's love of Klingons. And so for her to then end up with a Klingon made so much sense. Like she had chosen
She's
to
kind of a Klingon otaku.
Yes.
Like she studies like Klingon martial arts. She speaks it perfectly, multiple lives. And I mean, but she takes it very seriously. This is one of the things I think is really funny is everybody's like, oh, she's so kind and she's so sweet. And I'm like, she killed a guy or helped 3 guys kill a guy from another life.
Yeah.
Like she died and that debt wasn't over.
Yep.
She's not that sweet.
No. And she knows a billion different ways I feel like to kill you with her pinky finger if she wanted.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, she holds her own against Worf, man.
Which is
not good.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. Well, so we've kind of talked around the idea of like the Trill, but one of the things about this book is there's just kind of a lot of things that you kind of really dive into. And one of the things that you added for this story and kind of added to the Trill was the idea of the lost lights.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd love to hear, where that idea came from for you, and kind of fleshing that out with Vess's plan and kind of this ultimately, I think it's the very dichotomy of everything that the Trill and the symbiont stand for together. Like it's the exact opposite of,
right.
And I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Well, so there are a couple of things. First of all, the second that they were like, we want you to write a Dax story, the very first thing that I thought was this has to span multiple lifetimes. It feels like such a waste when you have a Dax-centric story that doesn't have something to do with another lifetime. And then the second thing was that, that symbiosis is all about sharing 100% of yourself. And so what happens when it's not a codependent relationship like that? What happens when it's sort of an abusive relationship? And Vess evolved as a villain because of the abuses that Dax has suffered on the show. For Curzon to agree to become part of her while having sexually harassed her without ever confessing any of this to her is quite the burden. That guy is always going to be a part of you, and you get to talk to him about it, sort of. But there's a lot of processing, I imagine, that would cost you. And to say nothing of Duran. And so there are these dark secrets in this organization that's all like, love, peace, we share ourselves because we are wise. They're not, though. And it's an obvious front. And you have a character who is canonically traumatized by them. So Dax hates the Symbiosis Commission going into it. And so to take that hatred that she has hinted at in the show and the sources of it, Curzon is only part of it. Of course, there's Dr. Renhall's betrayal over Duran and Equilibrium. All of those things kind of start to coalesce around a set of themes that create Vess. And so that's really where Vess comes from, is I needed a multiple lifetime spanning villain who represents a whole lot of selfishness and that sort of a perversion of symbiosis.
I really like the way you talk about that because it really does feel like the ultimate in selfishness. And it is kind of scary because, like you said, there's this peace and love and whatever, but then it's like we run into the Trill Section 31, basically. And because they're unfortunately for all of us, there's always a dark side to things. And that's the unfortunate nature of for at least for us as humans, our dark sides. But yeah, I really appreciated that. And I loved because one of the things that I did think that this book really did was it did show how the Symbiosis Commission is right in the sense that it is very important to pick who is picked to be a host because of how wrong this actually can go. And your book really shows absolutely how bad this can be for host as well as symbiont.
it's sort of, yeah, the Symbiosis Commission is the worst thing ever until you tried being without it. And one of the things that really strikes me about the Symbiosis Commission is that very clearly the field docents are flawed. They sort of make that the point of them, even. In that one episode where a young initiate is about to be taught or docented by Dax, and he's terrified because it's Dax, and he's got all these worries. And you start to see, well, he's worried because I think his parents wanted him to become joined or something like that, so he has these artificial pressures on him, causing him to try and share his entire soul with another person for all of eternity. And then you have these people who are clearly not impartial judges who render a pass-fail at the end of the most grueling period of your life so far. And then to even further complicate things, if the judges exhibit a regular bias, that regular bias could have a compounding or accruing effect over lifetimes. So if you were a little biased towards one thing and you pick somebody who's biased like you, right? All of a sudden, the Trill culture that survives over eons is the one that's picked by the group in power. Which everybody Vest points out a couple of times, I think.
Yeah. Well, and that the part of that, I think, and what you added for the Trill is that it really does, like, there is this bureaucracy that kind of makes this able to continue because there's a lack of transparency. Right. And to me, that really stuck out, is that this lasts because we're keeping secrets where we don't need to keep secrets, and we're holding on to power in really bad ways. And I thought that was right. It felt very like Trek. It felt very relevant to many of the things we see. Good. Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, in Equilibrium, when Renhall's willing to let her die to preserve their precious state secret, and Commander Sisko comes in there, and which, by the way, part of the reason I wrote Revenant is because that episode where she gets sort of all of her backstory, it's all done by Julian and Commander Sisko, and it's or Captain Sisko, and you're like, I really think Dax should have been there for that, but this, that's what's great about books, right? But if the commission was willing to let her die, and she found out about that and they stopped it, what about the times? What about the people they didn't find out about? Right? Like, what if somebody else? Surely she's not the only case with a memory block bad host. Are they letting people just go out of sync and then die?
Yeah, and
I mean, they were going to.
It's a scary thought, right? And part of, I think, one of the things that you do with all of this is that, we do see that, especially the way that Vest deals with things, it's this ultimate in that, and Duran struggling and not understanding this idea. It's not about being subservient. It's not about one being in power over the other and dominance. It's about harmony.
Right.
And that's the thing to which a character like, and this is what made him completely unsuitable for joining anyway, is that he doesn't understand this idea of not being control and being in harmony with one another. Like, the Jewish word for it is like, is for peace is shalom. Like, there is this absolute peace between the symbiont and the host, and that's what makes them compatible. And people like him, and of course like Vess, they have none of that, and that's where I think that selfishness comes in. So all of this together to me was something that I saw a lot of places where it was very relevant to the place that we're at in the world today, where it's just like there's all of this selfishness, and it's causing no harmony. Because people think that life should be about one being dominant over the other, and rather than us working together.
Right. And yeah, exactly. Saying, like, just because people have different sets of priorities doesn't necessarily make them wrong.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point. I really there was this whole part of the book, especially with Duran, and I love the flashbacks there with him. But this idea of like life being hard and Duran not really being ready for that or wanting that. And it kind of reminded me of the quote from The Princess Bride where Wesley's like, life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something, you know?
Right.
And Duran wants the easy button for life.
Yeah, right. He's just, I just need some unlimited wisdom, please.
Exactly. And what I really liked about this book is the way that you kind of reinforce this idea, like the best things in life are the ones that are almost always the hardest to get. And that's one of the things that makes, you know, whether it's flawed or not, the way the Symbiosis Commission has this set up is they are trying to almost even force the people out who aren't willing to work the hardest for it, because this is something that's so important. And it's also something that can, as we talked about, can go so wrong. So it needs to be difficult.
Well, and you know, when you think about it, they have 500 or so new joinings a year. It's not enough. It's not even close to enough, and not to support a multi-million population. You know, probably multi-billion population. And so when you're sort of measuring who gets those things, the Symbiosis Commission is right to be afraid that commercial interests and corruption and graft would be used to say, like, well, I may be Don Corleone, but I'd also like to have Einstein put in me, you know, like, I think that there's a huge potential for the world's most, you know, the galaxy's most villainous people to reinforce their villainy using symbiosis. And it's terrifying because the people who are often afraid to die, who are afraid of leaving no legacy, are often tyrants.
Yeah, we call them Sith in another franchise.
Right. Exactly. And so you do need to have a bureaucracy that is largely independent and has very little interaction with the ruling class. But at the same time, that lack of interaction, especially with the public body politic, causes other issues. There's no oversight now, and there's, you know, and these are the sorts of things that we have when we have any sort of governmental body, whether we're talking about the World Health Organization or the CIA. You know, you're always going to have that. Well, the organization automatically moves to protect itself. Or good or bad, organizations always protect themselves first. And you see that in the Symbiosis Commission.
Well, and I mean, in some ways too, like that's where, when you think about it, like that's where Duran and Vess are, right? They're protecting themselves. They only care about themselves instead of the greater whole. And, you know, and in that way, that is where they are looking for the easy way out instead of the difficult way, which obviously the juxtaposition is with, like, you writing Dax in this story. She's had the difficult way, right? She had a difficult time getting it accepted. You know, she got washed out. She went back. And so...
And then she won and her troubles started.
Yeah. but at the same time, she's also willing to do the hard work of what it means to be joined, right? To continue to become one with these other versions of who she used to be. And so
she goes and stands trial for Curzon's old murder. She goes and digs up the past every time something goes wrong. You know, she's always left holding the bag, but she always holds it.
Yeah.
And that's something that's amazing about her as a character, that is sort of her, a lot of ways, her purpose. She's just one of the most meaningful characters that's, I won't say often overlooked, because everybody loves and misses her. And I think really when they killed her off, I think that has really solidified how much everybody loved her. You know, because that was a BS way to die.
You know, I mean, as much as, and I do love Ezri, but I remember that, you know, I remember that happening on television, and I just remember being devastated. And it was difficult because it was a character that we had all grown to love, and I think had meant so much to so many people.
Yes, absolutely. And especially for somebody who's, sort of questioning their place in the world, seeing somebody who's walked in a lot of different shoes and does so well, can be really amazing and really meaningful, So, and that's not to say that Esri doesn't fulfill all that. She does, actually. She's sort of the awkward phase, right?
Yeah.
She's the early
The
experimentation
awkward
phase.
stage Trill. Yeah.
I love that about her. I think that's great. Like, she didn't go through the initiate program. She doesn't know what she's doing. That's pretty funny, and it's a good storyline, and I don't want to take away from Nicole DeBoer, who did a great job, and
no,
it's a good
I agree.
interview, I might add.
Yeah,
really nice person.
I always wanted to meet her. She's one of my favorites, and so hopefully I'll get a chance to meet her at a con one day. But as we were talking, I was kind of thinking about this idea of, Nemi is trying to cure the emptiness that she felt inside. And it kind of reminded me of this idea of like that no Trill is an island entirely unto themselves, right? And it really struck me that so many Trill are stuck thinking the only true life is being joined.
Right.
And that's not the case, because there is life to be had and a good life outside being joined, and you can have fulfillment and joy and to be selfless and for the benefit of others and yourself in a way that brings you fulfillment even without having, this thing that we all consider to be really important for the Trill. And like understanding that, I think what makes, like, when I was thinking about like what makes initiates ready to be joined is when they realize they don't necessarily have to be joined to be whole.
That's so true.
Right? And so that's the one thing that somebody like Nemi and or Duran don't have, right? They feel like they are on an island and the only thing that's going to fix this is by somebody else coming in and fixing their problems. That's not how it works.
Correct. Well, and you sort of nailed one of the central themes, which is that if somebody has something that you value more than anything, if somebody has their finger on that, that's your lever. They can do anything to you. If you say, I'll pay any price, yeah, you will. It's pretty much guaranteed. And so, and this is true, by the way, in publishing as well, and in show business. This is true if you try to climb the ladder really high at your local job, whatever. That if you have something that you desire more than anything, and a predator catches wind of that, then they will exploit it. And it's very easy for them to do. And I've known people who have been, fans of series, who have been, I'm not here, but who have had unfortunate encounters with creators. I've known writers who have had, predatory encounters with agents and editors. There's no shortage of people in the world who are ready to take everything from you if you say, I'll give you anything. And that's something that I would like people to recognize. You never know when you might be asked to make that kind of a compromise, and if you're not ready.
Well, and I really like that you say that, because I think one of the things that it reminds you is that, like, what is it that you're willing to sacrifice everything for, and is it worth the sacrifice? Like, is it
right?
Is it something that is good enough or big enough or important enough or actually really worth giving everything for? Like, because a lot of people, we even in my own life, I think, anybody can say this if they really dig deep. It's like, oh, well, I've given my life for this thing, and then you get it and you realize, oh, this isn't really worth it.
I love to tell people this because, in a lot of ways, I feel like I've accomplished many of my dreams. but accomplishing your dreams doesn't solve your problems.
That's true. Yeah.
And it's the weirdest thing because it's this amazing gift, that you've accomplished your dreams and you've gone to this place that's rarefied air, and that's great. You still have problems. You still have people that don't like you. You still have, bills that gotta get paid. And I hate to tell you this, writing doesn't do a great job of that. Not at first anyway. And so we can't be the sort of people that will do anything for that dream job, for example. In this country, we like to sell you the idea that you're going to work in this amazing job and then you're not working anymore. You're just a zookeeper that we pay. You just love it that much. That's crap. That's crap. And I see people get broken in half over corporate loyalty all the time, trying to chase down their dream job. You think $1 billion is going to help you, but there's no such thing as a great person with $1 billion.
Yeah. The Beatles were right. Can't buy me love. So,
right. I mean, maybe somebody knows some great billionaire, and if any of my employers who are billionaires are watching, I'm sure you're awesome.
Yeah. Oh,
totally different.
Oh my gosh. I wanted to, for you, I was kind of thinking of like a last question. I was just thinking for you as with writing this book, and what was the most important thing for you in it, the thing that you felt like you poured the most part of yourself into, that kind of, because I know every author, there's something about every book that they write where there's a big piece of them in that book, or else they wouldn't write it. And I'm just kind of wondering for you, what was the biggest piece of you in this book?
So at the end, when Jadzia is taking care of everybody else and she's alone, and she finally decides to talk to Curzon and have the conversation that she really didn't have with him when he was Odo. Because it's sort of the beginning of it, and she gets shocked, I think, and doesn't sort of get all of her questions in, and then it's over. And so I wanted to have, I think a lot of people who are in positions to take care of others in their orbit often find that they give everything they can, and then at the end of the day, they have some issues that they need to work through, that are things that have hurt them or that are bothering them. And maybe they have to rely only on themselves. And because everybody else is too dead or traumatized in this case, to be of any real assistance. But at the same time, she's called her friends and they've helped her as much as they can. And she's done everything that she can. And that conversation, I mean, I agonized over it because everybody who is older than a certain age, you get to a point where you sort of incriminate your past self and you say, I don't like who you were, or at least I do. I grow so much as a person that I grow away from things I don't like, hopefully. And to have that conversation and to try and delicately walk that line where you have to forgive yourself at some point, and you have to hold yourself accountable forevermore. And that's such a hard line to walk. And it's not something that anybody really masters easily. And just like I said, writing that scene, I mean, it was a lot of back and forth. I mean, we really agonized over it on my end, on the editorial side as well.
I really like the way that you put that, though, because, I think if anybody is, like you said, you get to a certain age and you look back and you're like, if you're honest with yourself, there's always those things in your life where you're like, wow, I was a dick, or I was a terrible
you feel
person.
like a total failure about something.
Exactly. Yeah. And it is important to, like you said, it's not just about forgetting yourself, but it is about holding yourself accountable. And I like that idea of like having the personal responsibility aspect there, because a lot of times I think that gets forgotten and it's just about, oh, you just need to forgive yourself and move on. Well, but you need to also, it's I think the reason that Kirk in Star Trek V says, I need my pain, because it's that carrying with you the lesson that you learned and the pain. As we talked about earlier, the difficulties in life are the things that make us like overcome those humps in our life. They overcome those lumps of our personality to where we're hopefully becoming better versions of ourselves.
I think that we start out as very soft people, and that we lack a lot of definition. And every time the world puts a dent in us, it also contributes to our shape. And some of the dents are unfair. But the question is, can you work with that and make a beautiful shape, or are you going to allow it to twist you?
Yeah, wow. That's really good. Because it's also about like things happen to you either unexpectedly or not your fault, or
hopefully unexpectedly.
Or they are something that maybe you've caused, and all of those things. Like, but again, it becomes about the responsibility of like, am I gonna be a victim or am I gonna be a victor? Like,
Wow.
Yeah,
that's a nice one. That's and you're not wrong. And at the same time, it's never too late to recognize that you are the villain, or that the villain resides inside of you. And that when that happens, see, in my books, and I probably shouldn't say this, is sort of exposing the inner workings of the Watch here, but there's a simple test you can follow to see which one of my villains is evil. And you cross the threshold into evil when you're exposed to ignorance and you choose evil. Right? Because ignorance is an interesting thing because it can't coexist with knowledge. It's instantly vaporized by knowledge. So at that point, you have two options, right? Fix yourself or choose evil. And so anyway, Curzon is interesting because he sort of chooses evil at the Jantara. In a lot of ways, he sort of word salads her and oh, you were so lovely, and I don't. You have to understand my position, and he like tries to like worm out of it. And so it's good because she says like that's not enough.
Yeah.
And we have things like that. Every one of us has things like that in our past. Even if it just was you weren't enough of a hero when it was required. It's not even your fault. It's just they needed a hero. It wasn't you.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that's the fun of and the importance of good storytelling in the end, because it does help us to be able to come to a realization about these things in a way that not soft pedals it, but allows us to accept it more than somebody just being in our face and wagging their finger, and I think that's the beauty of like, it's why storytelling has been so important since, the myths of any country, whether you think about Greece or Norse mythology and all those kind of things. Like it helps us to be able to see a picture of what we are. It holds the mirror up for us. And do we see our reflection in the good and the bad? And then when it's the bad, are we willing to make the change?
I like to think that, people think that we read stories for escapism, and maybe that's where you start. But it's where you find yourself when you're lost, and that's why stories are the most important thing in my life. And it's weird because, when you write tie-ins, it's a corporate venture, it's owned by Paramount for money. But at the same time, it's like, for me, it's a chance to tell a story, and that's sacred. So That's yeah, I guess that's my closing thought is when we go to the theater or the library or whatever, we're not trying to get away from ourselves. We're looking for ourselves.
Well, that was fantastic. I mean, Alex, I think it is a fantastic way to kind of to bring things to a close. But as always, and especially since this is the first time that you're here on Literary Treks, where can people find you online? And what else do you have out that they should be either looking at now, or what do you have coming up that people should be checking out?
Sure. So coming this July, I have my new trilogy kicking off with Orbit called August Kitco and the Mechas from Space. It's book one of the Star Metal Symphony. And it's about August Kitco and the Mechas from Space. What else? No, I'm just kidding. It's about a jazz musician and a fabulous pop star at the end of the galaxy fighting against robots, giant robots from space. What are you going to do? I'm very excited about that. And if you're the kind of person who thinks, I'm going to wait until the trilogy's out to binge it, don't do that, because then they don't finish publishing it. Go ahead, buy it, put it on your shelf, and just keep it there. You don't have to read it. I won't tell anyone. And also, Revenant just came out. You can find me online at Alex White Books. You can on Twitter, alexrwhite.com if you want to go to my website. You can also check for content warnings there on any of my books on the books page if you need to know any of that stuff ahead of time. I have a good number of books out, including 2 Aliens books. If you like the Aliens series, The Cold Forge and Into Charybdis, and my Salvagers series from Orbit's pretty well regarded too, if you like space fantasy. So magic in space, and unlike Star Wars, I just call it magic.
Nice. Well, okay, so I'm going to give something away because we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and one last question for you.
Sure.
If you had to pick a song that represents Revenant to you, and not one that you wrote yourself, but just one in general that you kind of like, this is kind of what this meant to me as a book, what would that be?
Okay, hold on, because I have a playlist for Revenant.
Oh, fantastic!
I always build playlists for every single one of my books.
That's awesome.
So I think either Ghost Keeper by Klein Caruso and Given, or Desire by Bob Moses and Zhu. I have a lot of really I like EDM a lot. I'm sorry. That's me.
That's awesome, though. No, that's because as we were talking.
I'm not sorry. Yeah. I love EDM.
Yeah, well, and I mean, as we were talking before we started recording, I know you're so into music and everything. That's fantastic. So I love it. I love it. Well, you can find me, of course, all over social media, MattRushing02, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero, all those places. Of course, I'm here on the network doing the 602 Club, which is our general geek show, talking about all the fandoms we love, not Star Trek related, because, well, we talk a lot of Star Trek here on Trek FM. And you can also find me doing The Orb, as well as Warp 5. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and of course, Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. And then I'm over on the Nerd Party Network with 2 shows. One's a Finnish show I did with Drea Kaufman called Owl Post. We were talking about Harry Potter, 1 chapter at a time. And then talking about Star Wars with John Mills each and every week on Aggressive Negotiations. But thank you so much for joining us. But until next time, live long
and read on.
You call that light reading? To each his own, number one.